Hi, my name is Jesse Durham, and we're here for another episode where we're going to discuss systems, where there are systems in the world, how they function, and then, of course, for us, we'll be viewing how a system can make all the difference in what it is that you're already doing as an employee, a household, a small business, big business, investor, whatever your situation may be, how you can just really add fuel to the fire because of systems that can be laid out. Now, I would like to start by saying, there are going to be changes on the channel, literal physical changes on the channel because of equipment. I've ascertained a couple of different locations here on our property in the house and such, office, where we'll be able to do Zoom calls, recordings, webinars, and of course, record our material for the channel itself, where we're promoting the idea of you becoming your own banker as described in R. Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. It's all about the infinite banking concept, and I appreciate the patience for those that got in with us early on the channel. I've practiced personally this idea as a customer myself for years and years. And we started in 2015 on our journey to become our own bankers. From the very first time that my wife and I read Nelson's book, and then to where we are now, both of us professionals, licensed agents, educating, promoting his idea of bringing banking back to the me and you level. But I appreciate those that got in early, that endured, just having the content. The content was the value, I would say, in what I was sharing, and I didn't hesitate to have better equipment to get started because I got started in a very basic way. It was a 92-page book, large print, big illustrations. That's where I got started at. A phone call with a friend who had heard about the idea of becoming your own banker. So I do apologize, and I don't apologize. All my business owners and the investors, you're going to recognize, opportunity doesn't wait on people. So we got started, we launched the channel, but we have been making some upgrades. If you have some feedback on that, I'm an open book. I can check my ego and take any feedback. I appreciate that aspect as well. We know that the content is tried and true because we've practiced it ourselves. We've helped other people practice it over the years. We've educated ourselves along the way, still educating ourselves along the way. It's an absolute paradigm shift, this concept of becoming your own banker. So that's not going to stop, but we do want to be able to accelerate everyone's learning curve. That's asking, seeking, and knocking, right? So I appreciate that. Give us any feedback as necessary, and we'll get dived in on this channel. But remember that nugget. Opportunity doesn't wait on somebody. And in fact, we could dive in on a part of what Nash says in regards to the infinite banking concept. Folks who practice setting aside capital for a banking system that they own and control will have opportunities seek them out. The opportunity will find you if you've gone through the discipline and the system of establishing capital that you own and control and can deploy and warehouse, etc. So let's get started on our subject of systems. Okay. Now I'd like to start by saying that Nash himself said that accessing cash values and whole life policies is not new, was not new when he wrote his book, was not new when he conceived of the idea of the infinite banking concept. However, what he said, he added to the idea that sure, you could access capital in your whole life policy, the cash values there that had built up and accrued, and that was just with standard, basic, or fundamental whole life insurance policies, not even properly structured for the intent of privatized banking, but he added scale to that idea. And when I say scale, we're going to dive in on this concept of a system. Now, Robert Kiyosaki, someone else that I really enjoy reading behind, and adds a lot of value in this particular conversation, because he has said before in his cash flow quadrant books, Rich Dad Poor Dad, that big businesses are separated by the systems that they have in place. Okay, the systems that they have in place is what separates them from perhaps a smaller business. You know, when he talks about the self-employed or the specialist, there could be somebody who is the Michelangelo of what they do, and yet if they're not the one laying, you know, hour upon hour painting the Sistine Chapel, I hope I'm using the correct analogy right there, I believe I am, then it's not going to get done. But what adds scale to a big business is systems. Now consider fast food chains. Now banks, fast food chains, franchises, there are lots of examples where we can see that an entity or a business adds scale to what they do by another location, another franchise, right? I mean, there's banks, beautiful banks, well-kept banks that are paid for by the customers on every corner of every little town, big or small. Fast food restaurants. Again, let me go back to that example. Those restaurants have a system in place where a 16-year-old can walk in and keep it going, right? So systems are what is making the difference there from a small business to a big business. Now, I'm not trying to qualify one over another, but I am trying to point out that whether we're talking about a household versus a household that has a system in place where they warehouse wealth, deploy their capital, recapture their capital, they control the banking function in their life. The average American household versus a household that's practicing the infinite banking concept wins by default. The household that is practicing the infinite banking concept, that's not abdicated the control and the deployment of their capital, of their cash flow, of their wealth, of their money, is going to win over the household that doesn't by default. Now, that does continue on to small businesses, big businesses, investments. If you are a small business owner and you're king or queen of what it is that you're doing, you're the best at it. And I'm sure folks that are listening in on this channel, you're the best at what you do. But you do have competitors. So in any space, there's competitors. So again, if all things are equal, but one abdicates their ability to control the banking function for their business, and then another business equal, comparable in every other aspect, the one that controls the banking function will win by default. They can move faster, they have more control, growth, opportunities, so many different things that we can dive in on. But if it's something that's not touched, completely abdicated, there's no benefit there. Big businesses, systems are better than the lack of systems. Systems add scale. Now, same thing could be said for investing. You know, having control of the banking function in your life where you can deploy capital when an opportunity arises is a beautiful thing and something that you own and control. And I've heard folks make comparisons, and I'm not knocking accessing the liquid representation of an asset. You know, you may own a home where you have some equity in that home, and you can access, if you're allowed, right? If according to the terms and the paperwork and the scrutiny of some other entity that's not you, but sure, perhaps you can access in a liquid form the equity that you have in an asset. There's what that can look like, jumping through the hoops, whatever the case may be, but also in contrast with a properly structured whole life policy with a mutual company that pays a dividend that you own and control, where day upon day the cash value goes up. From the time that the policy is written to the time you graduate, that policy matures, the cash value on weekends, holidays, pandemics, government shutdowns, world wars, ups, downs, lefts, rights, the cash value grows every single day, day over day. Those two are very different situations and scenarios. So let's continue the conversation. Scale, systems, an entity that you own and control. Now, I've recently, and I know there's disinformation, misinformation out there. Nash would say that most times somebody's understanding of anything to do with insurance is, somebody else's regurgitated misunderstanding. So they don't understand because the person that they spoke to or heard from or coworker, brother-in-law, whatever the case may be, didn't know what they were saying. And that's the Roy Rogers quote, right? That the problem in America isn't so much what we don't know, it's what we think we know that just ain't so. So what I'm saying here then is that we should all evaluate what systems we have in place. Do you have a system for your money? Or is it like with somebody I was talking with this week, great guy, and it really struck me when he said this. He said, money earned is money spent. Money earned is money spent. And for many of us, that's so the case. That was definitely the case for me years back. I can look at that scenario where, I could even go back to when my wife and I were dating, and I just worked to be able to take her out to a nice restaurant, for us to be able to catch a movie, to be able to put gas in the car. That was it. I worked and labored hard, worked hard. Summers out in the sun, doing manual labor with my own two hands. And I'm not knocking that. But what I'm saying is I did spend it all. It all got gone. I didn't have a system in place. I didn't have the knowledge in place. So when I say system, I can be, and we'll dive in on the mechanics, the tactical, the physical, sure. But also the knowledge, the education, and the understanding. Having a system mentally of how to warehouse wealth, deploy it, grow it, recapture it, be my own banker. So money earned is money spent for a lot of us, and it first and foremost, in my opinion, has to do with our level of education, our understanding. But then after that, we need a system in place. We actually need a practical, tactical system in place. For us on this channel, those that are already clients, of course, myself, we have properly structured whole life policies with mutual companies that pay a dividend. And we start, and for those of you that are vetting this idea, perhaps this is your first video. For those of you that are vetting this idea, you start at a place where I would suggest, this is my suggestion, that we all start with a first policy with a number that is both imaginative but also logical and reasonable. And those aren't my words, those are Nash's words. Nash in his book promoted the infinite banking concept by saying we need to use imagination, we need to use logic, we need to use reason, we need to consider prophecy. Okay? So in picking a number for a first policy, let's consider picking a number that both stretches us, that's imaginative, and yet also is logical and reasonable, right? If you don't raise your eyebrows a little bit when discussing how much you should fund a policy with, how much premium you should be paying for a policy that you own and control, if it doesn't raise your eyebrows a little bit, then maybe we're not even talking about a serious number yet. Okay, just food for thought there. But I've also heard, again, this is where I go back to the misinformation. Folks will say, well, if you can't put, and they'll put a number, $10,000 and whatever. My opinion is that, and my understanding is that decimals move left and right. So what may be a big number for someone may be a small number for another, and what may be small may be big for another. So that's why I offer that idea in considering as a gauge something that's imaginative but also reasonable, logical. Okay, stretches your thinking, but it's reasonable. But I'm not here to say, well, if you don't have $10,000, you can't practice the infinite banking concept. You absolutely can. See, your system can be with you at the starting point, like me as a high school student, working summers and weekends, earning, a minimum wage, which I have some age to me. I don't necessarily know that I want to say what the minimum wage was when I was earning it years and years ago, but we're talking about a handful of dollars, okay? You can start the infinite banking concept. You can start the infinite banking concept right where you are if you want to. And again, I'm not trying to say that the infinite banking concept's for everybody or that it's for nobody. You get to decide what's for you. But I believe that when people know what's going on, they'll know what they want to do. So you can start the infinite banking concept right where you're at. Now, whether that's with a policy or not, whether the entity that you practice the infinite banking concept with is a whole life policy that's been properly structured for the banking purpose with a mutual company that pays a dividend and has done so for, well over 100 years. That remains to be seen. You may do it with a coffee can, right? To start. I don't know. But you can start no matter where you're at. And also I wouldn't, as I've heard said, folks say that, well, if somebody doesn't have a net worth of 10 million, 20 million, then, the IBC probably isn't for them. Now, I don't even know if they know who Nash is or have read his book. So again, I'm really, really hesitant and won't, in fact, tell you what your number should be. I'll provoke thought. I'll ask some questions, get you to ask yourself some questions and figure out where you should be able to start. What number do you want to start with? I mean, if you understand the infinite banking concept, and you'll have to before we're going to have a conversation about constructing a policy for your needs, you're going to have a certain level of understanding. You don't have to be a master. You don't have to be a professional, but you need to have a certain level of understanding before we'll be talking about how to construct a policy for your own specific needs, even though I'd be happy to. But if we understand that our exponential curve of not interrupting compounding has this upward growth to it day over day, weekends, holidays, through downturns, etc. How soon do you want to start that? And what number do you want to start that with? You'll have to figure out how much you want to pay yourself, how often you want to pay yourself, and that'll be your start to your system. Now, for most folks, when they've done their due diligence and they have invested in their education in becoming your own banker, it normally does not take long before we're talking about subsequent policies. It didn't take my wife and I don't know if it took 6 months from the time that we actually had and were using our first policy before we decided that we wanted to start our second one. And at the time, our first policy was a significant number for us. We had you eat an elephant one bite at a time. We didn't start out too big. We didn't start out too small necessarily at that time. But then even again, 6 months later, we're realizing, we've got more of our own financial footprint that we can be covering, that we can be practicing this idea of becoming our own bankers to cover what our lifestyle was at that time. And of course, that's grown since then. We have 3 children and growing business, and we want to travel and we enjoy traveling, all these different things, these normal life things. So start where you can and should, and that's for you to decide what that looks like. I don't mind having a conversation, but that's for you to decide what that's going to look like. The idea is becoming your own banker. Not me being your banker, not anybody else being your banker, but you becoming your own banker. So, systems, scale. This is what we're talking about, scale. If you don't have a policy yet, you're vetting the idea. What are your systems that you have in place? Are they working? That's a valid question to ask yourself. Whatever it is that if you could emotionally detach, take a step back, look at your financial situation and say, am I happy with it? Are things going the way I want? Do I have a system in place? What does that system look like? Is it money earned and money spent? Is money spent? Money earned is money spent? Is that your system? It was mine for a while. I'm not judging. I'm just asking. And then if you have a system in place, whether it's something other than the infinite banking concept, if you just, whatever that might look like, a paper budget, whatever, Are you working your system? Are you working? Because many times systems work. Okay, you can say what you want about the fast food chains, but they keep going. They've got locations left and right. And again, satisfied or not satisfied, they keep churning out their product or their service, right? So are you working your systems? Another question for yourself. Now let's take a look at what I like to call the vending machine analogy. So let's consider that there's a vending machine that we could go out, and this is just hypothetical. This is just an exercise, a mental exercise, right? But let's say there were a vending machine that we could go out and purchase. Okay, so that truly would be an investment. I'm not trying to make the comparison that the infinite banking concept is an investment. It's not. It's you buying a product, a whole life policy, okay, but that has been properly constructed with a mutual company that pays a dividend for you to be able to practice the infinite banking concept by accessing your cash values according to how it's been structured, okay, and so on. Everything that is entailed in R. Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. But let's say that we were going to procure a vending machine that we would have to purchase. Okay, so there's a capitalization phase, and if we consider buying this vending machine as a purchase for a business, and we expect that we will have monies come into this entity, and then something will be kicked out. Well, let's say that we as the owners understand that, this vehicle, this vending machine, this vehicle, this entity is going to have to be serviced and stocked, etc. Okay? And we expect that customers are going to come along and then make their purchases. So we start out going into a deficit, okay? Our asset is not very liquid or as liquid. Of course, sure, we could turn right around immediately and resell the thing. It would have lost some value. So we recognize concepts like that and considering this as a business venture. And it costs us something to get the machine. It costs us something to upkeep the machine. It costs us something to stock the machine. And yet we anticipate that customers are going to come along, make a purchase, and over time, we expect that what we will earn from this machine, and we should throw something in here about taxes. Of course, you can't even have a hypothetical example without talking about taxes. We'd have to account for all these other types of things and any other overhead associated with this vending machine business. But eventually we have this expectation that our earnings will both have covered for buying the machine itself, stocking it with supplies, any upkeep, overhead, taxes that we'll end up paying on our gains, anything that's going to be connected to us transferring this, if we're thinking really long range, like we should be, to our heirs or beneficiaries, organizations that we care about deeply, whatever that would look like. It's an asset that we own. There will eventually be a transfer of that wealth. And we have an expectation that the growth and the gains and the profits from this venture will outpace what it took us to get it started and even to maintain it in perpetuity. Well, with a whole life policy, and again, I'm not trying to make the case that a whole life policy is an investment. It's not. You're buying a product for yourself. It's life insurance, but it comes with all the benefits from being properly structured, if it is properly structured, with a mutual company that pays a dividend. Then there will also be a capitalization phase in the beginning of your policy. If you're a client, you know this. You've literally been able to see how this process works as it's laid out in Nelson's book. So there will be a capitalization phase where you've not lost any money, but you have witnessed a lack of liquidation in the beginning. There's a capitalization phase where you're covering everything that the unilateral contract that you've purchased guarantees you. Now, here's going to be the difference between this vending machine analogy and a whole life policy that's been properly structured with a mutual company for the banking purpose, paying a dividend. And I'm not going to focus on the dividend, but there are guarantees. There's guaranteed growth in a whole life policy that's been properly structured. There are, and that's that growth that we've already been talking about, like day after day, weekends, holidays. Cash values continue to grow day after day, year after year. So the difference is there are going to be some, there are many differences, but there's definitely a difference to be noted in the guarantee. We don't know in the vending machine situation that there are going to be clients, customers come along that want to buy those potato chips or whatever the case may be. Whereas with a whole life policy that we own and control, we know what the guarantees are before we ever sign the dotted line to own that policy. And from there on, it's a unilateral contract where when we pay the premiums that we've chosen to pay into the policy that we own and control, the insurance company is obligated to perform every little bit of that contract, of that policy. So I just think that it's a very helpful analogy, because in the beginning, in starting a policy or in getting a subsequent policy, I have multiple policies with multiple different companies. I'm not married to any particular one company. I'm married to my wife, not a company. So we own multiple policies with multiple companies. And you witness that lack of liquidation, that loss of liquidation in the beginning. The asset is still 100% what it is that you purchased, an outstanding death benefit from the get-go, and one that should continue to grow uninterrupted because your premiums, any policy loans that you pay back, any interest that you add to what you pay for your policy, all of that, the dividend that you can get from a company can go to buy paid up additions, so the death benefit will continue to rise. But you have that from day one. You have a death benefit. You've purchased life insurance, and yet the cash value can grow depending on how you practice as a practitioner of the infinite banking concept and the death benefit itself. So there's that loss of liquidation in the beginning, but year after year, that policy becomes more and more efficient. You put in $1, you get a percentage of that back. You put in $1, you get a greater percentage of that back, or you have at least access to that. Again, you're the banker, you're the one that's in control. You put in $1, you put in $1, you get a percentage back. You put in $1, you get a percentage back. You put in $1, you get a percentage back. And that just keeps growing until you put in $1 and you get access to that full dollar. And then, because we're talking about policies that are, 121-year policies, we're talking about a very long time. I've got 3 young children. They're going to get to have access to cash values and the guarantee of a death benefit to keep transferring wealth generation upon generation, for many years to come, God willing. And it becomes more and more efficient. So you get to where you put in your dollar and you get more than that dollar accessible to you in a known setting as a policy loan. It could be a withdrawal, sure, but what we coach is to use policy loans to access the cash value in your policy, because it's a known interest setting. You own it, you control it, you can pay that back, not pay that back. You can set up the terms on how you want to pay that back, how much, how often, how long, never. You're the banker. So in considering systems, what do you have in place? Could you benefit from taking back control of the banking function in your life for your household, for your small business, for your side gig, for any investing that you do, for a big business that you own and run and operate? You'll win by default if you take control of the banking function on top of what it is that you're already doing. So I truly hope that this has been helpful, encouraging, insightful. If you have any more thoughts, questions, concerns about systems, about practicing the infinite banking concept, I'd love to be able to hear from you. You can reach us at durhamtalents@gmail.com or 828-817-4223 on phone. This has been a great place pleasure for me. I look forward to hearing from you in our next conversation. Take care. Have a great day.